Welcome, and thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Emily Raymond, and I'm a Reference and Adult Services Librarian here at the New Haven Free Public Library. I'm excited to welcome our guest this evening, Gina Barreca, to discuss her new book, Fast, Fierce Women. Gina Barreca, Board of Trustees, Distinguished Professor of English at the University of Connecticut, has written 10 books, including the best-selling They Used to Call Me Snow White, But I Drifted, as well as Babes in Boyland, A Personal History of Coeducation in the Ivy League, and It's Not That I'm Bitter, How I Learned to Stop Worrying About Visible Panty Lines and Conquer the World. She's edited 18 others, including Fast Funny Women, 75 Essays of Flash Nonfiction, and the new 2022 collection, Fast Fierce Women. Translated into Chinese, Japanese, German, and Spanish, her scholarly and trade books have helped establish the study of women's humor as a thing. Barreca's been published by the New York Times, The Independent of London, Cosmopolitan, the Harvard Business Review, and she's appeared often as a repeat guest on The Today Show, CNN, the BBC, PBS, NPR, 2020, and yes, Oprah. Gina's Psychology Today blog has well over 7.5 million views, and she has no hobbies. I had the pleasure of having class with Professor Barreca during my undergraduate career, and it is a privilege to see her again. Welcome, Gina, and thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Emily, I'm just, as you know, I am delighted to see you. We were just chatting before we turned this on, and I am thrilled. So you were in a class I taught on, which is my standard issue class, modern British literature, right?
Yep.
So what do you remember best or worst, I should say?
I remember not being a fan of Virginia Woolf, but really enjoying the class anyway.
Now, which wolf? Because I go back and forth between the wolves. Was it
to the lighthouse?
To the lighthouse. Okay.
To the lighthouse. And I very much remember a moment of myself describing a lady character as a strong female character, thinking I was making an intelligent point. And you told me, Emily, no, that is a weak word. You don't call men strong male characters. You know, there are better words out there. And that's actually something I really loved about this book, is that fierce is such a better word than strong.
Well, that's interesting. And I am, again, forgive me for my recrimination, but I hold that. You were probably you were probably talking about Lily Barr, who is the artist, right? The artist into the lighthouse. And so the minute that we see an artist who is an unmarried woman, and we see her doing her own thing, and that she's not, you know, she's trying to be nice to the men around her, but she's refusing to allow them to make her feel small, or to make her feel like she should agree with everything they say. And I think that especially for young people, both young men and women in the classes, that just to say she's a strong woman, it's like too vague. You know, I mean, that it's really, it's the idea of, okay, we should assume in the way we do with male characters that she would be a strong character just to appear in the book. And so that how to make it more specific, but oh my God, I now wish I could. I should have said it in a more tender and nurturing way, Emily.
No, it worked for me because it stuck with me for 10 years.
Well, fair enough.
And you know, I was thinking about it when I was reading this book, because, you know, it was a very formative part of my education as, you know, studying English, and you know, learning about, you know, how to write and how characters work.
And do you remember, and again, there's no quiz, you're no longer graded, Emily. There are no in-class writings. It's okay. But do you remember, did we start with the good soldier in that class?
I think we did.
Okay.
I can't tell you what happened in the good soldier.
No, that's fine. Again, no quiz in the good soldier, but these are the courses that I've taught at UConn since 1987. So it's when the crust was still cooling. It's a very long time ago that I first came up from New York City to begin teaching at the University of Connecticut. Never had taking the job without ever having seen the campus, which I now look back and think, interesting choice, 30-year-old Gina. That was really like, really? That a good idea? I was like, but I wanted a job that was in 3 hours of New York City, which was my home base. My father lived, my brother and his family, his kids, most of my best friends. And I actually made a circle for a 3-hour commute around New York City and applied for every academic job. And I almost took a job at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst, but they wanted me to come and give a talk on campus, which is pretty typical. UConn said I could. I'd already had a couple of books out even when I was in graduate school, and I was a pretty ambitious candidate, and they said that I could have the job without coming to campus first, without giving a talk on campus. UMass wanted me to come to give a talk on campus. And the day before I was supposed to go up to give that talk, there was a blizzard. And I called the University of Connecticut and said, I'm taking the job. And so on some level, meteorology brought me into your life. Like other, it's not astrology, it's not fate, it's not kismet, but it was the weather that I decided. And I married, my husband, who I've been married to for 30 years. He taught at UConn. He's retired now. Michael Meyer, I don't know if you had him as a professor of American literature, but he taught there from even before I did. And I mean, but I looked at it and I thought, nah, this place wants me more because they don't even want me to have to give a talk, and it's closer to New York and it's snowing. So I decided that my Sicilian grandmothers and my mother, who had died when I was in high school, was giving me some kind of signal that this was the job I was destined to have. And Emily, you're here tonight. There are other people from UConn, I think, tonight who are signed up to watch and to listen from my life. And so clearly it was absolutely the right decision. But The Good Soldier, as a Ford Madox Ford novel, and I teach it because in a way I want to make sure that the really terrific students know that this is going to be a demanding course, and the students who think that they can just read the cartoon version on SparkNotes or whatever are going to leave. I mean, it's sort of weeding out the herd, and the ones who stay are always fabulous, and I'm so proud of them. And I've now got 35 years of students that I'm really proud of, and it makes me very happy to do my job. And it sounds like you're happy to be at the New Haven Public Library.
I am, and I'm really happy to be talking about your book.
Thank you.
Today. So I was hoping that you might be willing to read a bit from your introduction of it, because I thought that was an absolutely amazing example of the ferocity that you talk about that's talked about throughout the book from all of the wonderful writers.
Thank you very much. When I first put the first book I did in what is now a series based out of a Connecticut-based press that was in part started by another former student, right? Dave Legere. So is one of the publishers, and it's Woodhull Press. And so the first book I did was Fast Funny Women, that came out last year. And this was sort of like a surprise success for all of us who worked on it. And so do you know the children's book Stone Soup?
Oh, yeah.
Right. So where people go around, it's like, you have an onion, I have a potato, and they're all like in individual, sort of like they're siloed, as we would now say, in their own little places. And for Fast Funny Women, so I wrote, again, having been around for a while, I wrote to writers that I knew, or writers whose reputations I knew, or that I'd met at conferences. And these included Jane Smiley, who won the Pulitzer Prize for American Literature, and Marge Piercy, who's, was New York Times bestseller, and who I grew up reading, and was one of the people who made me into a feminist, and Faye Weldon, who we might well have read in your class, and
Life and Loves of a She-Devil.
Life and Loves of a She-Devil, and who got an honorary degree from UConn. Liza Donnelly, who's a New Yorker cartoonist who wrote a piece, who also got an honorary degree from UConn. The New York Times bestselling graphic artist, graphic novelist, Mimi Pond, who did the cover to this one, is in it. Darian Huji, who wrote Friendship Bread, which was a big bestseller, but now who is become in sort of the middle of her life, a fabulous poet. So, I mean, Nicole Hollander of the Sylvia Crunton. So all of these people sort of kicked in and wrote original pieces for the book. And I actually asked my old neighbor from Brooklyn, New York, I said, do you want to be in the book? And she said, okay. And that was Judge Judy. Judge Judy is in this book. Judge Judy and I grew up next door to each other on Ocean Avenue in Brooklyn, New York. Now, Judy Shineland, I knew her as Judy Blum because she was the girl next door. She's a little older than I am. She looks younger than I do. And she is tiny. You could put Judy in a Happy Meal. She is a small, with a very large presence, obviously. And so Judy, she fast, funny. So the idea of fast is under 750 words. So it's fast nonfiction. So it's like, flash fiction, it's flash nonfiction. And fast women always seem like, oh, she's fast. That was a phrase I grew up with and embodied in my youth. And so, but the book, really had some traction. And so thinking that, okay, we'll do it again. And then next year we're going to do Fast Fallen Women. And then we're going to, again, knock on wood and the waters don't rise. We'll do one every year. So for Fierce, and this cover was designed by a former student in my creative writing class, Miranda Wright, who also has an essay in the book. And she did this, and I think it's just a wonderfully representative cover. It's me in the polka dot dress with the pen and the broom and the red shoes and the white in her hair. So, but I want to think about what fierce means. And I think that women tend to, and everything I write could go for men too. So we can argue about that later. But, when I talk about fierce for women, that I think a lot of women are fierce without identifying themselves as fierce. And so as I say in the introduction, so this is my opening salvo at the beginning of the book. Fierce can be getting out of bed. It can be taking a shower. It can be switching jobs, seeing a shrink, going to war, or getting out of a relationship that could kill you. It could be crossing your arms across your chest or opening them up in an embrace. A fierce woman is fierce in belief, in joy, in compassion, in commitment, in intelligence, in wit, and in community. She's capable not only of finding her own way, but of creating a path for others. She doesn't just break down doors, she tears down walls. And that to me was something I learned fairly early on, that it wasn't just like, some kind of ladder of success so that somebody needs to make it easier for you to follow them. It's like you have to break down the ladder. You have to level the playing field. You have to give access to people who no one ever showed them what a ladder was. No one ever told them you have to learn how to do this. It's not the only way to get to something that's elevated. We gotta make sure that it's easier to get in and out of things than we think it is. A fierce woman makes her deadlines, makes the calls she dreads, makes good on her promises, and makes trouble when necessary, but only when necessary. She's not a coward. She accepts responsibility, but she won't carry somebody else's guilt. She's not a sin eater, no doormat, and no blotting pad silently soaking up whatever drops on her from above or seeps into her from the sides. She doesn't cry wolf until the wolf is actually at the door, or until she needs to call up the rest of the pack to join her for significant and meaningful lupine backup. A few of us were born fierce, but most of us had to learn it. I was in high school when I started to find my own courage and overcome my sense of trepidation about life. But that sense of confidence and fearlessness came at a cost. I grew up fast and not on purpose. My mother, an immigrant and a shy sad woman, was diagnosed with cancer when I was 15. I looked after her during her unendurable illness. She died during my junior year of high school. My father was a devoted parent, but he worked long days and couldn't look after the day-by-day life of a teenage girl. There was nothing to do but look after myself. I learned to stop waiting for someone else to provide comfort, solace, or apologies. I stopped depending on anyone, parent, family members, teachers, boyfriends, or friends to define who I was or who I might become. And I accepted the need to think about my future and map my own destiny. And I also started thinking about the ways that women, not only me, but all women, had for too long permitted others to define our lives. So I think that, that's the part, because it's in those moments. And I don't know if you remember, Emily, when I talk in class, and I talk often when I give lectures, to different groups, about the moments of the irrevocable. There are the moments, and I love to hear people talk about that. That's what a lot of the essays are about. I know that Jane Cook, and so her, her absolutely wonderful essay in the book is about when, sort of finding out what it was like at work and in her professional life. And, when you start to need, what are those moments that sort of push you into becoming who you were meant to be or who you really were. And when it just sort of drives you sort of past a point when there's no going back. And that's not something bad, that's like something where it's like, no, okay, I'm done with that. I mean, I'm done with the moment that is, that where I was trying to fit into the pattern that somebody else made for me. And the only part about Jane's piece was that I couldn't actually use some of the publishers couldn't use the wonderful illustrations that she had actually sort of introduced into the piece, which were absolutely charming and wonderful. But everybody's got Laura Rossi's story about homeschooling during the pandemic, special education, and especially about working with her special needs son and the pressure about that. And where she's talking about, weekdays, I'm quoting from Laura's essay, were one long, meandering, unending school day. But when people are, Cindy Eastman, who's another Connecticut writer, talking about learning how to say yes, when, Marissa Elena James, who is now a rabbi, but who was at UConn, is talking about, stepping up to work with refugees where she can talk about things that other people couldn't talk about. Danielle Waring, another former undergraduate, talking about dealing with her diagnosis of cancer and moving on from that, as did Jennifer Sager, as did Pat McGrath. I mean, there are people talking about going through really tough parts of their lives. And it's like, okay, this is how I dealt with it. And this, how they dealt with it was an indication of being fierce. And they may not have identified themselves as fierce at those moments, but they really are. So, okay, so this is my, and then again, obviously we want to really open it up to questions and have a conversation, and I want to hear the questions that you have. But here's my version of fierce, my illustration, my story about it. So this was like right around when I first started teaching in stores. When I first got my driver's license, I didn't have a license when I got to Stores Connecticut. I'm like the oldest at 30. I was like the oldest American ever to get a driver's license. And that was because in Stores Connecticut, like no one would accept a check. And I would show them like my UConn faculty ID. And they would go like, lady, where's your check? And it would be like, where's your driver's license? And I would be, I don't have a driver's license. And they would be like, is your parole officer outside? There was like no reason that they could imagine that no one had a driver's license. But if you live in a city, not everybody has a driver's license. But anyway, so I got to Connecticut, I had a driver's license. But this is when I was still like learning how to commute. And I kept my rent stabilized apartment until I got tenure. So this is why I was still in my rent stabilized apartment, commuting up and back, having gotten my driver's license. So when I was young, divorced, and living on New York's Lafayette Street in the Lower East Side in a small, shabby, rent-stabilized apartment, the building superintendent announced that everybody's windows were going to be replaced. Now that seemed like a great idea. It was an old building. It was like terrific. We're going to get to keep our heat in. This is fabulous. Everybody is protected by this. Okay, the landlords had finally figured out they were, this was in their interest to keep the heat in. But it all happened in November. And so that's when the Lower East Side becomes like a wind tunnel. And the weather, let's say, was at the best time, did not give us the best time to replace the windows. So the impossibly bizarre idea of taking out and replacing all the windows in a 3-story building during a series of snowstorms, which was what was happening, could only have been prompted by bad management and poor planning. But it didn't bother me. It really didn't, that a bunch of guys were coming over to work in the building. That's fine. They'd do their job and it would all be over soon, right? I made a big pot of coffee to show them some gratitude for their hard work. I'm the first one in my family, like a lot of UConn students, like a lot of people, I'm the first one in my family ever to go to college. Most of my family, really did work for a living, did labor for a living. I'm the first woman in my family to graduate from high school in a timely fashion. It was not, and so, yeah, I make coffee. I think I put out some, Milano cookies. I'm trying to be a person. Okay. So, and the guys worked hard. 4 burly men removed the windows in a matter of minutes. Wasn't that big an apartment, right? The temperature in the apartment instantly dropped 30 degrees and snow started settling on the sills as they readied the replacement windows. Huffing and grunting, they lifted the new windows into place. There was one problem, however. The new windows didn't fit into the frames. The new windows were the wrong size. The old windows, now broken into unusable pieces, lay in heaps in the poorly lit hallway outside my apartment door. We all looked at each other, the guys and me. The wind howled. We'll put some plastic sheeting over the windows, the head guy explained. We'll come back tomorrow. Snow is blowing into my apartment. I live in a 2nd-story apartment, and so all my windows are gone. And this guy says he's going to put plastic sheeting to get me through the night. No, not only would my apartment become a tundra within the hour, but by dawn, like homeless people would be living with me. And I'm sure they'd be very nice people, but they would have squatters' rights by that point, right? I mean, they'd be like sleeping on the fold-out couch. They would be cooking. And so when I realized that, that's when I started to yell. Let's say I suggested that plastic sheeting over the windows would offer inadequate protection. And let's say I didn't exactly say it in those words. There was silence. Well, it wasn't really silent because the wind was picking up and some of the loose pieces of broken wood were starting to bang against the empty window frames. 4 large men stood in front of me as I raved. And I'm saying to them, how could you not make sure that you had the right windows before you knocked out the old ones? I used those words and threw in some additional ones that I won't. More silence. Finally, the head guy, the big guy, paused before he looked into my eyes and barked, "You're not perfect either, lady." Now, I'm not going to argue about that. It's true. I am not perfect. But that remains the most astonishing statement ever made to a disgruntled customer by work people, right? "You're not perfect either, lady." I said, "That's true. It's true. But I didn't just go to your house break your windows, and suggest you sleep under a couple of extra blankets until tomorrow. And I must have looked as fierce as I felt, because within 2 hours, they sent some truck to Queens, got new workmen from the Bronx, and installed perfectly fitted windows. The lesson here, you don't need to be perfect in order to insist that somebody treats you like a person. Second lesson, just because you try to offer someone a warm greeting, it doesn't mean they won't leave you out in the cold. 3, learning how to raise hell is a useful and often underrated skill. So here's finally what fierce women will do. And this is what all the essays are about. And again, these are NPR's. Maureen Corrigan is in this book, New York Times bestselling, fabulous fiction, author, novelist, Caroline Leavitt, stand-up comic Leighann Ford, the director of the Irma Bobbitt Workshop, Terry Reeves. I mean, all of these, the playwright Beth Blatt, screenwriter Pamela Katz, all these people are in this book talking about ferocity. But here's what fierce women will do. Fierce women will tell you the truth, and we won't sugarcoat it. We'll laugh only when your stories are funny. We'll argue until the sun goes down, it comes up again without batting an eye, let alone fluttering an eyelash in a flirtatious attempt to get you to settle down. We don't want to settle down anymore. We've been settled like some Western township, and now we want to kick up the dust and tear down the fences. Not only do we not want to settle down, we won't settle for less than what we've always wanted, a good time and a fair fight. So the good time and the fair fight, if you know any women, for Mother's Day, for graduation, for birthdays, for Passover, for Easter, somebody who wants a good time and a fair fight, this really is a good book for them. So thank you for letting me read from it.
Thank you for reading. I've loved that story from when I first read it. And, being able to hold your own against a bunch of guys who are telling you you're wrong, it's right. Important to have that skill.
You're not perfect either, they just didn't know what to say because they knew. And if my brother or my father or the man who's going to become my husband, if any guy had been said, they would have gone to get the windows. It was only because of this broad standing alone that they're saying, we'll put saran wrap. It's like they wouldn't have even tried to get away. I really believe it. And it was because I was raised next door to Judge Judy in a block full of people who yelled and said, you can't do this. You're not doing this. That's, but it is a skill and a talent, and it's something, because we're all brought up to be nice girls. And it's just that some of us have abandoned the project. And so you need a new script. That's all.
So in that line that we're raised to be nice girls, I do have an audience question. Do you have any plans to publish a young adult or children's edition of this series to encourage girls and young women to be fierce as well?
Oh, that's interesting. I think most of these stories can be read by anybody over 16. I don't think that there's too much that would, having known, having some teenagers in my life as, the children of friends, I don't think that there's too much that would sort of make anybody, think of something that they haven't thought of before by that. But for something that was especially for young adults, they're all 750 words, so they're easy to read. They're stories you can read, next to the bed, while you're having a cup of coffee, while you're doing something else, while you're waiting in the car, because a lot of us read while other things are going on. And that's one of the reasons that the 750 word format works so well. And there are writers in the book who are young as 19 and as old as 89. So, one of the things I'm proudest of about the collections, and as I intend to go forward with them, is that they really do represent, and not in some false sort of contrived way, but a real sense of diversity, because those represent the people that I know and I work with, and the students that I've had over the years, and my friends and writers who I admire. Amy Tan is going to be in the next book, and Fast Fallen Women. I'm very proud of that. I mean, they just happen to be people who are saying, yeah, okay, you can do this and take my stuff, and so that's a really interesting, I mean, it is a really interesting question about, oh, and there's Pat McGrath sending a note. Pat McGrath's essay on finding her voice after going through chemotherapy is an astonishingly meaningful one. And there are, I think, 3 essays, and one, fourth one, depending on how you look at it, that are about not only surviving cancer, but about going through treatment, and about, finding the humor and the triumph and again, yelling down yet another foe who's trying to do more than just saran wrap your windows. So that I'm just going to say, I think it's a really intriguing question about doing something for an even younger bunch of women, but girls, but I'm not sure that if you're 13, you're ready for that. I mean, and maybe I'm just thinking about different 13-year-olds. When I was 13, I think I was still like intrigued by Barbie. I think I was 16 by the time I got to like Janis Joplin, and then my life changed. So I don't know if I mean, and I know YA is now the thing. I'm teaching a class in the fall. It's a new class for me on popular literature. And so I was asking other students who were taking classes in popular literature. I said, what's on it? And there were all of these young adult novels. And that's very nice. But I figured that a lot of people don't need people to lead them into young adult novels. So I'm teaching like Butterfield 8, which is not a young adult novel. And I'm teaching these like really difficult, White Teeth by Zadie Smith, like books that sort of changed the world, How to Get Filthy Rich in Rising Asia, which is one of my favorite new novels it's right up here, by Mohsin Hamad. I mean, it's like they're going to do Harry Potter on their own. I don't need to lead them into Harry Potter. I need to lead them into John O'Hara. So we have different ways of defining popular literature, but it's so interesting question. And thank you. That's a new idea. And I think it'll be for somebody else, but probably not for me. But I'm always open to suggestions.
So one of my questions, so this is nominally a Women's History Month event. This is a Women's History Month program. And I was wondering, what, in your opinion, what impact has women's humor made on women's history? I know this is something you could very much wax poetic about.
That's where you pull the string on my neck and I talk for 3 days. That this is. So the first book, I'm just looking to see if I have it. I have a good version of it here. I'll show you the original paperback. This is the original paperback of They Used to Call Me Snow White, But I Drifted. So this became a bestseller. So this is when it was issued by, so it came out Viking Penguin in 1991, was big excerpt in the New York Times, 3 pages in the entertainment section. And we had no idea that it was going to do this. And it was based in part on my dissertation, right? So it's getting my PhD at the CUNY Graduate Center. And when I first proposed looking at women's humor, gender specificity and humor as a topic, my lovely professors, and I really did love them. And in fact, my brother just got his PhD today. My 71-year-old brother was awarded his PhD today by the CUNY Graduate Center. So it's like he called up and says, this afternoon, he said, we are the doctors Barreca. And if there were 2 people you did not expect to get their PhDs, it was me and my brother. I mean, it was really, you wouldn't look at the 2 of us, sort of grubby, Italian kids playing in the gutter, saying those two will go on to get their doctorates. It was not like it wasn't in the cards, but somehow we managed to do it. But anyway, so the research first started when I thought, there's a difference between how these women writers use humor. And I was thinking not only of George Eliot and Jane Austen, and then sort of, Aphra Behn and sort of, writers that remain still today, a little more obscure, early writers, Charlotte Lennox, but also writers like Virginia Woolf, and with their strong female characters. And, but where they sneak their humor in. It's not the same kind of humor. Even Woolf and Joyce, who are sort of writing around the same time, they're very different kinds of humor. And Woolf's humor is sort of like smuggling contraband, in a suitcase. It's like, I remember Michael and I, my husband and I went to Ireland at one time. Michael's oldest son, I have the two stepsons who are now at that adorable age where they're both attorneys. And they're so cute at this age. It's just wonderful. And, but he graduated from McGill with a philosophy degree. And so naturally, as one does, went to be a bicycle messenger in Dublin. And so he was working in Dublin, and his birthday happens to be on March 17th. So he's there for St. Patrick's Day. So we go to see him. And as we were coming back through Boston, so we're back at O'Hare, and there's like a little old Irish lady out of Central Casting coming through us with a battered suitcase. And shocking to both of us, the TSA officials, this is pre 9/11 and everything, things were much easier then. But they stopped this little old lady with this battered suitcase and say, ma'am, do us a favor and open up. And she's like, what are you doing? I'm not, everything's fine. Why are you making me, I'm exhausted. I said, ma'am, could you open up? It's like, well, I prefer not to. It's like, can you please? She opens it up. It's filled with lamb, with legs of lamb, with sausages, with all these meat products. And they're like, please go over there. We need to take you through and incredibly naively, I guess I said, how? And they said, people smuggle in lamb meat products from Europe, whether it's from Italy and they're smuggling in sausages, or whether it's from Turkey and they're smuggling it, but that they bring their food from home, but that especially from Ireland to Boston, there was a route where people were bringing the lamb, or people, the favorite foods from home. But I felt, and it was sort of initial, because I thought this is what women's humor is like. It's disguised as we're all being just nice little old ladies. And underneath that, it's like you have illegal substances that are just under the neatly pressed linen and a handkerchief and, like a nightcap. So that if you look closely at what these women writers are doing, they're being really subversive. They're smuggling in really nasty satire under this cover of gentility. And so I had such fun, but I went to my professors and said, I'd really like to write about that. And I remember one of them, who was, again, no fool, but said very kindly, if sort of paternally, said, Gina, if there was something that was specific that could be made theoretically important about gender theory or in humor, don't you think someone else would have done it? And I was like, I have not seen it out here. And then, thank God, I found a woman who became a real guardian angel to me. She died far too young, named Nancy Walker. And she, at that point, was a professor at, I think, the University of Alaska, and then ended up at Vanderbilt, University down in Nashville. But she had actually started to write about women's humor in American nonfiction, actually. And she wrote about domestic humorists and like Irma Bombeck and Jean Kerr and so she had published some articles about that. And then Emily Toth and a few other scholars and just started to publish articles about it. So there was some, so I could go to these professors and want to say, I'm really not the only part. Like, I'm not making this out of whole cloth. There were these senior scholars, because I'm like 26. And I'm saying there are these senior scholars who have done this. And they're like, well, go see what you can do about it. So, 10 books later, 18 edited collections later, there were a lot of people doing this. And I'm very happy that they used to call me So White, but I drifted, is now something that is cited in a lot of people's research about this. Because again, I don't think I was the first one to notice it. I think I was the first one to like be willing to like put an imprint on it and like stamp it and say, I really think there's something to this, and not be talked out of the room by people who supposedly knew better. So Women's History Month, it's always when I started out giving talks 30 years ago, there would usually be some guy in the back of the room, like in a flannel hunting cap, and he'd be yelling, why does there have to be a Women's History Month? There's no Men's History Month. And you go like, sweetheart, every month is Men's History Month. It's like, it's okay. We're not taking anything away from you. It's really okay. It's really fine. We'll still let you watch Don Rickles. It's all right. It's really, we're not taking Johnny Carson away from you. You can watch all the reruns. You can watch Archie Bunker, and we won't point out that that was also a subversive cultural overturning of stereotypes where he was in fact the buffoon, and we'll just let you watch him. And if that's your hero, that's fine. But at least it sort of brought things into the discussion. So it's sort of like, I'm delighted to be part of Women's History Month. And if that's what gets me a little frame in the thing, mazel tov, that's great. I'll take any History Month I can get. That's fabulous.
Okay, I have another, that was wonderful. I have another audience question. So what advice do you have for aspiring feminist writers, little baby feminist writers?
Baby feminists, little baby feminists, that they have to, it's the advice that I have for most writers. I have a piece in Writer's Digest and a podcast that Writer's Digest did with me that came out in February. I have real advice for writers. I mean, I take it very seriously. And as an elder of the tribe now, I try to, again, talk straight about this to people, which is that you have to write a lot. And you have to read everything. You have to, and that's why libraries are crucial, and libraries are themselves subversive institutions. Your favorite writers can't be people who are dead for 100 years. I mean, they can be, but you have to know who's published what in the last 3 years. You have to be current. You have to be reading the stuff that's coming out recently. You have to know your community of writers, and you have to be part of it. You have to support other contemporary writers. You have to sign up for their blogs or their websites or their newsletters. You have to be, involved and invested in a community of writers. So you can't just say, I want to be Emily Dickinson. You can't just say, I can recite Robert Frost. It's like, okay, but what have you read that was published in the last 5 years? And you're going like, the new biography of Emily Dickinson. Like, that's good, but it's not enough, okay? You have to support each other. And so that's crucial. And for feminist writers, I mean, it's the constant sort of reevaluation of what feminist means. And when feminism remains the last F word in the culture. This is, It's the idea that everybody would rather say anything else that starts with F than feminist. That it, because it's scary. And again, as I often say, I still have young women who come into my class and will start with their voices still go up at the ends of their sentences. And it's like, Professor Barreca, I see it says on your Wikipedia page that you're a radical feminist. And I don't really know what that means. And I'm thinking, how can I say that I'm a radical feminist? It's like before, not for nothing, but before I go teach my classes at UConn, which go from 5 to 7:30, and I usually get there around 11 in the morning, and then I stay until 8:30 or whatever the students are done actually talking in my office, that I like make my husband dinner so that those nights he won't just be like gnawing on a nature bar or something. You know, I mean, like, I am an old-fashioned Italian woman to do this. And again, we, you know, my life is actually ridiculously conventional, but radical feminism, the idea of radical feminism is the idea that women are not just made as creatures who allow men to make other men. Okay, if you believe that women don't exist just so that men can produce other men, you're a feminist. Okay, if you believe that women are human beings, this is like the Jeff Foxworthy thing. You know, if you believe that women are human beings, you're a feminist. It's like, you don't have to like wear shoes that go down in the back. You know, you don't have, you can wear lipstick. It's about doing the whole idea about being a feminist. You can be home with 6 kids. That's great. And be a feminist. It's being whatever you want. The idea of feminism, and I assume everybody I meet, men and women and everybody who's identifies as whatever, I assume anybody I meet is a feminist because I give people the benefit of the doubt. I'm assuming you're a feminist, just as I'm assuming you know how to eat with cutlery under certain circumstances. I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt. There are times you pick up a taco or a hot dog and you're just like stuffing food into your mouth. But I'm assuming if I serve you linguine, you're not going to eat it with your hands. You know, I mean, so I'm assuming that'll be fine. So I'm assuming you're a feminist because I'm assuming you believe women are human beings. I mean, to me, you have to prove otherwise. And sadly, some people do. And that's why feminist writers still need to exist. And that's why I don't just use humanist or do whatever. I mean, feminism, the F word, has its place.
All right, I think we have time for one last question because unfortunately this only goes until 7:30.
Okay.
But my final question of the evening is, so you mentioned you have Hope for Other Books. The next one is Fast Fallen Women.
Right.
What can you tell me about that premise?
Oh, Fast Fallen Women. Okay, so thank you for asking. So Fallen Women, I was going back, I was thinking about, again, this sounds so pretentious, but I really was thinking about Paradise Lost. And I tell my students that they should take the class on Paradise. I mean, you know, that if it's not from the Bible, the quote is not from the Bible, and it's not from Oscar Wilde, or it's not from Dorothy Parker, it'll be from Paradise Lost, right? And so they should read Paradise Lost. And that's not the only reason. But I was thinking that when we think about the fall of man, right, the phrase, the fall of man, that it's about mankind, right? It's about humanity, and it's, you know, this big moral, religious, theological thing. But when we say fallen woman, it's one girl who just ended up in the back of a car where she made a poor choice. You know, that it's an individual story. So the fall of man, the fall of humanity, is everybody. But each woman falls in her own way. And so, but I'm also thinking about, okay, fallen woman. Is that somebody who fell off a pedestal? And I mean, did she want to be on the pedestal in the first place? I mean, do men put us on a pedestal so they can look up our skirts? I mean, what's the whole pedestal business? Is there somebody, does it count as falling if somebody pushed you? I mean, you know, there are a lot of people who don't fall, but they're pushed. And what's that? Is it not a fall if you decide to leap and you fly? I mean, what is the fall actually mean? And so, going back to the theological or the literary or the whatever, I mean, the theological, it's the Felix culpa, is the fortunate fall, right? That's Adam and Eve getting kicked out of the Garden of Eden because, and it's Eve, of course, who's tempted. And that's how I did a book with Gene Weingarten of the Washington Post called I'm What's Stupid, where they put together the columns that we had done together for the Washington Post over a couple of years. And Gene and I had never met. We wrote the book on email and over the phone. And so it was all these columns in the Sunday Washington Post magazine section. And it was interesting to sort of get the real questions, because Gene said, as this feminist, do you believe that God is a woman? And it was very easy for me to say no, absolutely not, because no female God would ever begin the lesson with, here's the thing you can't eat. Okay, that only a male God would begin with a diet. Okay, here's an apple, don't eat it. It's like, no, a female God would just be, here's an apple. It cleans your teeth. It counts as fiber. You can have it with a nice piece of brie. It's delicious. You can have it in a cake. You can make it in a pie. Here's just some pastry. Here's a recipe. This is it. The first thing a male God says is, I made this beautiful piece of food. Don't touch it. No female God. That and endometriosis proves to me that it's a male God. I don't have a problem with that idea. I will argue that is not, no, those two things are definitive. But the idea of Adam and Eve getting kicked out because it was Eve's fault, because she was so weak and succumbed, as you will know from Paradise Lost and the stories behind it, that Eve, and imagine, so there's one woman who can make the fall of man. And I think that was always why men were very suspicious of women gathering in groups, because it was like, if one woman could make all of humanity fall, imagine what a whole bunch of them in one room could do. Can you imagine what that would happen? So, that's why there was always laughter coming out of the ladies' room, and men are terrified when they see women laughing together because it invokes the fall of man. And there was rarely, you notice, laughter coming out of the men's room. I mean, there's really, women are there and we're talking, and if there's laughter coming out of the men's room, we should worry. But anyway, so when Eve eats the apple and we get the Felix culpa, so it's the fortunate fall. Felix culpa does not mean the cat is to blame. It means fortunate fall. And it's supposed to be because then you get to be redeemed. But the trouble is with women falling is that a lot of times the women who have fallen or been pushed or end up face down are not offered redemption. There are narratives where they are lost. Once they fall, they are erased. They are downtrodden. They are pushed below anything that can be represented. And so I wanted, and people are sending in wonderful contributions about triumph over what they might have initially seen as a fall, and how they found new ways to move themselves, to ascend, to reach new heights. But it was because of that moment when they first encountered what they saw as a moment of the irrevocable that would have pushed them over somewhere that they didn't think they could go.
Well, this has been an absolute treat, and I wish I had another hour to talk to you, but unfortunately the library closes in 30 minutes. So I think this is the point where I'm going to wrap things up. So everyone, Fast Fierce Women is available now to check out from the New Haven Free Public Library, and copies of Fast Funny Women are on order and will hopefully be here soon. This event was made possible by gifts to the New Haven Free Public Library Foundation. If you enjoyed the discussion, please consider making a donation at nhfpl.org/donate to help support the collections, programs, and services of the library throughout the year. A survey will appear in your browsers after you sign off. Please take a moment to respond. We read all of our feedback and use it to inform future offerings. And please join us on April 12th at 7 p.m. for Democracy in America, presented in partnership with Yale Public Humanities, to hear about Yale's portraits of Elihu Yale and with the Yale Center for British Art Director, Courtney Martin. You can register for this and all of our upcoming programs by visiting our website. Thank you once again, Gina. It was wonderful to speak with you, and I hope you will come visit us again, maybe even in person when Fast Fallen Women comes out. Good night, everyone.
Night. Thank you. Thank you, Emily. Thank you, everybody at New Haven. Bye.
Bye.